Hello, and welcome to this ARA webinar with staff from CPDA, the Council of Producers and Distributors of Agrotechnology, titled Adjuvant Advantage for the Sales Agronomist. The second webinar in Season 3 of this series will focus on drift reduction adjuvants and why DRAs should be included in every tank to save growers money and reduce complaints. We'd like to take this time to thank Growmark for sponsoring today's webinar. My name is Hunter Carpenter, Senior Director of Public Policy for ARA, and I'll introduce our webinar speakers in just a bit. But first, I'll go over a few housekeeping items so you know what to expect. Webinars are an important part of the ARA professional development pathway and provide a great opportunity for ARA member companies to help educate their employees. Today's webinar will be recorded and added to the member-only ARA dashboard section of our website. As a reminder, you can log in to the member-only ARA dashboard to access past webinar recordings at any time. If you do not have an ARA login, you can email info@aradc.org to set one up. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation, but you can type them into the chat panel or Q&A function at any time. So with that out of the way, I'm excited to introduce our speakers, Johnny Roberts and Greg Dahl. Johnny has 45 years of experience in the development and technical support of pesticide, fertilizer, and adjuvant formulation. 44 of those years were spent with Helena Agri Enterprises. Johnny is also the co-inventor of 15 U.S. patents related to pesticide, adjuvant, and nutritional formulations. Greg retired from Winfield United in December of 2023, following over 40 years working for both the private and public sectors. He's currently living as president of the Weed Science Society of America and was president of the North Central Weed Science Society in 2017. He has been a certified crop advisor since 1998, and over 70 products have been brought to market from research by Greg and his team. Much of his research involves adjuvant and application technology. We would also like to acknowledge CPDA's advisory working group for all of their input in helping make this such a successful series of webinars for both ARA and CPDA. Following today's presentation, a QR code will be displayed for you to scan from your mobile device and earn 1 IPM continuing education credit as approved for certified crop advisors. And without further ado, I'll now turn it over to Johnny.
Thank you, Hunter. First, a bit of an update on the Endangered Species Act. As everyone knows, the CPDA has been working to get DRAs approved as a mitigation tool for this. And we're happy to say that with the support of agribusinesses and grower organizations, along with the USDA, they are now part of the EPA's herbicide strategy. And I'd also like to mention that we've had data input from more than 30 different companies to get to where we are. Next slide, please. And to show what the impact of this is, as you know, everyone's concerned about implementing the ESA is the loss of arable land due to buffer zone requirements. And here's an example of where if we use a medium course nozzle with a DRA, we can obtain buffer zone reductions as much as 95%. So it's a significant tool in making this a much more manageable issue. Next slide, please. Here's an example of how this will actually look on a pesticide label. This particular one is the BASF L-glufosinate ammonium product. And you'll notice that with on the subject of spray drift buffers on my right, if you're making an application by ground, you can be required to have as much as a 10-foot buffer. But if we include a DRA, we are able to reduce that buffer to 0. So as you can see, this can have a big impact and allowing us to keep more of our arable land in production. Next steps, you'll see the EPA reviewing and looking at DRAs for their insecticide, fungicide strategies. And then also CPDA will be working with them on protocols and a qualification list as well. Next slide, please. So, as we've learned in past seminars, we like to break adjuvants up into two big categories: the enhancers, things like non-ionic surfactants, crop oil concentrate, MSOs, materials that can directly enhance the activity of the pesticides they're applied with. And then the other group that we use is utilities, and these are the things that typically fix application problems like compatibility, uh, foam reduction, and so on. And the one that we're going to focus on is deposition slash drift control agent or drift reduction agents. And the thing that's important to note here, this is a case where utility function also has an indirect impact on enhancing efficacy, because obviously the more on target, the better it works. Next slide, please. In terms of agenda, we're going to visit the ESA, which we just finished. Why do so few acres get a drift and deposition aid? We're going to try to answer that. And what is the difference between a drift reduction versus a deposition aid? The importance of using them in all of our applications, and then a little bit about the CPDA Application Enhancement Program. Next slide, please. So the first, let's start with definitions. And we leverage against ASTM standard E1519, and those are our standardized definitions that we use in adjuvant and formulation technology. A deposition aid is simply defined as something that improves the ability of a spray to deposit on targeted surfaces. A drift reduction agent is a material used in a liquid spray mixture to reduce the driftable fines. And then driftable fines are defined are those droplets below 105 microns. Next slide, please. So what's the difference? And this is something that comes up quite often. When is a drift reduction agent a deposition aid, and so on? If that deposition agent is capable of reducing the number of spray droplets to that are formed less than 105 microns, then it may also be considered a drift reduction agent. So that is the definition. If that deposition agent reduces for driftable fine formation, then it can be called a drift reduction agent as well. And the thing to keep in mind is, again, to stress the more depositions, more of the applied pesticide on the intended target, and that in turn equals more dead weeds, bugs, and improved disease control, which is our ultimate goal here. Next slide, please. So why do pesticides in a water-based spray have such poor deposition characteristics? Well, one, the surface tension of water is such that water-based sprays tend to bounce off. They don't not retain very well. When you're trying to deposit them to a crop canopy and the water evaporates, obviously you can't reach very deeply into that. There's a loss of spray uniformity, and many of these pesticides are water insoluble. They in turn lose their uniformity in the mixture. And then some of the deposits that we get after, let's say, we get through the canopy are subject to wash off by rain, dew, and irrigation water. So deposition agents are used to reduce or prevent problems like this. Next slide, please. So how did they do it? Well, by reducing surface tension, I can reduce spray droplet bounce. If I have a component in that spray that reduces the rate of evaporation or the degree of it, obviously I'll get more through the canopy. If I get more retained, this is where you get into the spreading ability and able to retain at the same time, obviously a big goal. I get uniformity through that crop canopy, and then I get uniformity in the spray mix itself. And one of the things we want to stress is that reducing spray deposit evaporation is just as important as reducing spray droplet evaporation. A lot of our active ingredients that provide systemic activity are only able to have absorption when the spray deposit is kept wet. Greg will be going over in detail some of the impact that we have on this deposition to a canopy, but it's quite significant, as we'll learn a bit later. Next slide, please. So one of the obvious question that comes to mind is that if they're so good at doing this, why are we only averaging 15 to 25% of acres actually being treated with them? And this is changing, particularly since the advent of over-the-top dicamba sprays. But really, 25% or so is the most that we're using them. So why? Well, one of the reasons is that there's a perceived lack of value. My goal is to kill more weeds and bugs. Why should I be focused on something that just changes droplet size? Then others, people have a long memory when it comes to mixing and compatibility problems. Some people have had issues trying to use some of these products, and they get a mixing or compatibility issue, and their memory is such that I don't want to go back and use them again. There's also a perception that Greg will be addressing that that's all I have to worry about. I can maximize deposition by just using a nozzle. Why do I need the adjuvant? And the thing that we want to stress is we'll learn after the webinar is that none of these limitations apply when the proper drift control deposition agent is selected and used correctly. Next slide, please. There are limitations we need to be aware of. Some products that you may encounter have a limited shelf life. Some you have to protect from hot and cold. Always consult the product manufacturer for guidance there. Some different types of materials require high levels of agitation to work properly. There are also spray mix compatibility limitations. Some materials have a limit on the pH as far as high or low you can go. And then oftentimes, and this is something that we'll be talking about in some detail, is that producing spray droplets that have the minimum drift potential are not always optimum for the pesticide efficacy. And then we also have issues with container rinse difficulty with some materials. And again, your label will provide you, or the manufacturer will provide guidance in that area. Next slide, please. So we'll get into types, and this is where we can get into a really confusing list of materials and products. We're learning their functionality, and there's a lot of different roads to get to the same place. And I think it really is a good indicator from the industry of just how creative we can be and how productive we can be by getting so many options to give us the maximum performance with the least amount of problems. We divide deposition and drift reduction agents into two big categories: the oil emulsions and the polymers. The oil emulsions, as the name implies, they have oils in them. They can be designed to emulsify into water, or they can be designed to mix water directly into an oil, which we call an invert. Some of them use paraffin oil, some use methylated seed oil. Some are just blends of all of these oils and emulsifiers together. So quite a variety here. And a lot of these materials are able to find that Goldilocks spot of not getting droplets that are too fine, but not getting droplets that are outside of the range of causing and providing pesticide efficacy. On the polymers, another big category with a lot of different selections. You have access to polyacrylamides, which are either in the form of a concentrate or a ready-to-use polyacrylamide that has been pre-mixed. And these materials are the workhorses. They've been around since the mid-60s. They've had a lot of improvements and refinements in them over the years that make them great tools to use in this category. Then you have selections out of the plant gums. There are guar gums, xanthan gums, starches, cellulose that has been modified in various forms. And again, a lot of these products give us wonderful options in finding that Goldilocks spot between efficacy and optimum particle size for our droplets. Next slide, please. So what are the do's and don'ts? And there are some. And one of the things I want to stress here is that because of the myriad of different products and different formulations, they're really not hard, fast tools. It's like we're going to use some generalizations here, but as Mark Twain said, all generalizations are false, including this one. So we always go back to the product label. But as a general rule, we fully disperse or dissolve the pesticide and fertilizer before we add any DRA type material. We always look into our compatibility issue, look at the label for guidance. If we're mixing it with other fertilizers and things of that nature, if we don't have that guidance on the label, then we recommend jar tests. Always follow directions that are related to additional order. This is what I really would like to stress with this group of products. Additional order can be everything between getting a good mix or one that is a wreck. Always go to the manufacturer's directions and suggestions on drift rate. With polymer-based DRAs, particular, there'll be variations in mix time requirements and degree in additional order. So keep all these in mind, but again, I want to stress there are no absolutes in this. There's some general guidelines, but always refer back to that label and manufacturer's guidance on this subject. Next slide, please. So it can be quite dramatic, as we'll learn getting into Greg's part of the presentation. He's going to provide some detail on, we get into the efficacy part. People like to depend on visuals like this to see when deposition aids and drift reduction aids are working. It can be quite dramatic, and as we'll learn in the second part of the presentation, something that we want to take advantage of. Next slide, please. So one thing that we'll mention before we move on to Greg is that we do have an application enhancement certification program within CPDA. And what this program attempts to answer, the age-old conundrum of, okay, we get this perfect droplet from the standpoint of not drifting, but oftentimes they tend to be very coarse, and that's not the optimum place we need to be when we're trying to get more dead weeds and bugs. So this program is the first industry quantifiable performance-based certification program where we attempt to do that, where we screen products and to give you some perspective of what the droplet size is for efficacy while reducing the formation of driftable fines. So with that, I'll be turning it over to Greg next, who's going to provide you some of the background on where we come with these generalizations that I've been talking about.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Okay, so I'm going to start in this place right here, where we're talking about why do we need drift reduction adjuvants or deposition aids, because we've got these nozzles. And I've been in this industry for over 40 years. At the front end of the industry, we basically didn't have any nozzles or things like that. And oftentimes all I was doing was talking about, do you want to use brass or stainless steel? Well, over the last 25 to 30 years, we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of different nozzles that have been produced that do different things. And we really do need to start with those nozzles. So we're not fighting against nozzles. We need to have the correct nozzle in place to begin doing things correctly. And so the nozzles are in fact, very important. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm sure you've all seen these nozzle catalogs. They're very good for what they do. You've got different size nozzles. You have different type nozzles, things like that. They all have information that can be really helpful. The main problem that I see with these catalogs is all of these, this information was developed using water going through the nozzle. So we can have, when we add fertilizers, herbicides, oils, things like that, they do change how the droplets are formed, what size they are, how they behave. And so water just doesn't tell the whole story. And so we need to go beyond that. Next slide. So we're going to start with the nozzles, get the right nozzle, and then we're going to try to make that performance even better. And one of the nice things about deposition aids, drift reduction adjuvants, is in fact, we can modify those droplet spectrum so that we're getting a better result than we can get with the nozzle alone. And so we want to go into this area where we're using the correct nozzle and the correct deposition or drift reduction aid and get the result we're actually looking for. Next slide. So this was some work that was done earlier in my career. And if you look at this thing, we've got different solutions that are being sprayed into a wind tunnel, and looking at the amount of the spray volume that's in the size of driftable fines. And if you look at that gray bar, that's water. And if you look at that, we've got about 25% of that spray volume is in driftable fines. And that's not real good. So we're starting in a not a great place. And then if we look at it, we see what we put in there. So we've got different herbicide mixtures in there, and you can see things towards the right. We actually have more spray volume that's in driftable fines. For example, when we have the glyphosates and things like that, they can create more fines than water. And then surprisingly, we have things on the other end where we can have some things that actually will result in less spray volume that's in driftable fines. So knowing what we're spraying can have an effect, and having these wind tunnels to measure this stuff is really important to figure out what's really going on. Next slide. So we're going to use the nozzles. We're going to use the deposition aids to try and make better results. We want to reduce the amount of spray volume that is in driftable fines. We want to make things large enough so that we're getting things to deposit, but we want to have good coverage. So next slide. This was some work that we also did. And what we've got here is a whole bunch of different nozzles. And the dark green bars are the amount of spray volume that's in driftable fines from the glyphosate alone. And then the pale green bar is actually the amount of spray volume that's in driftable fines when we use the glyphosate plus a deposition aid or a drift reduction aid. And you can see we across all of those nozzles, we're getting about a 50% reduction in the amount of spray volume that can make driftable fines. And so no matter where your nozzle is, you're getting a benefit from that deposition aid. And as you see this, we really want to use both the nozzle and the deposition aid to get the results we're looking for. Next slide. And so this is some stuff that, some cards that were collected out in the field. We're basically using a nozzle that's going to give us an ultra coarse spray tip. We sprayed on it. We've got a series of leaves and then the ground where the cards were collected. You can see on all of those cards that the coverage isn't real great. We got a lot of big droplets there and a lot of space between them. And then like leaf 2, for some reason, we've got almost nothing there. And so we can do better than this. Just going with trying to get big droplets and minimizing drift with the nozzles, we can do better than that. Next slide. Okay, we've got different treatments on the left-hand side. In the middle column, we've got the percent of the spray volume that is in, we're going to call this driftable fines. And then on the right column, we've got the mean speed of those droplets. And so if we look at water, we've got 21% of the spray volume is in the size of driftable fines. If we add glyphosate to it, we actually get an increase in that spray volume. And so that's not a good thing. We're creating more droplets that are susceptible to drift. So then if we go to the next bar, there we just have a drift reduction adjuvant added to water. You can see we moved that from 21% down to 7%. On the next bar, we've added a non-ionic surfactant to the drift reduction adjuvant, and basically we have the same result. And then if we go to the bottom bar, we see we took a glyphosate, a drift reduction adjuvant, and a non-ionic surfactant, and we've got 12% of the spray volume is in the size of driftable fines, down from 27%. So we do want to use that drift reduction adjuvant to get us a lot less spray volume that's susceptible to driftable fines. Another thing we've got in the last column is if you look at the speed of those droplets, both the water and the glyphosate treatments, we've got 6.5. It's coming out at 6.5 meters per second. And what we have is a mixture of that. Big droplets are traveling fast, little droplets are not traveling fast. And so average over that, we've got that 6.5. If we look at the drift reduction adjuvant treatments, all of those things, we have eliminated a lot of the fines, and we've got better sized droplets that are going to land. And you can see that our speed is actually much faster, and that's a good thing. Next slide. Okay, this is a very complicated slide, and I just want to basically go in a little bit. Small droplets lose their speed, and they travel where the wind currents take them. And large droplets land. And so if we look at those droplets that are 5, 6, and 800 microns in size, you can see with different wind speeds, those droplets are landing very quickly after they're sprayed out, and we don't have significant drift going on there. Those droplets land. And then if we go up to those droplets that are 50 or 100 microns in size, you can see they're going a long ways. They're being carried by the wind patterns that are out there, and they're not landing. They'll actually be wasted, or they'll go someplace bad and do something bad. And so we want to make sure we get rid of those fines and that we get droplets that will actually land where we want them to be. Next slide. And so here's some data. We've got 2 fungicides with the blue bar, and their amount of the spray volume that's in driftable fines. And then we've got behind each one of them 3 different deposition aid drift reduction adjuvants. And you can see all of them are in fact reducing the amount of spray volume that's susceptible to driftable fines. So we should be getting better results with the fungicide plus the adjuvant as opposed to the fungicide alone. Next slide. Okay, this is something that we are trying to dispel. Applicators will go, I need better coverage, so I'm just going to crank up the pressure and just get my coverage that way. And you might get a little of that if your pest is at the top of the canopy, but you're not going to get anything down into the canopy. So this is a very bad way to address this. It isn't giving you the results you're really looking for. Next slide. And so, yeah, we really don't want you to crank up that pressure. We want you to use the correct nozzle, the drift reduction adjuvants to get your desired results. Next slide. Okay, this kind of goes back a little bit on some of the stuff that we had done before. Basically, we've got some middle-sized droplets at the bottom of this chart and some very small ones there. basically what I want to show you is that those little droplets don't travel as fast, and they're very susceptible in the second to the last column. They're very susceptible to evaporation, and they lose all of their momentum right away. So if we look at that 20 micron droplet, it's evaporating really fast, and it's going to not land. It won't land. It's going to go with the wind. And then as we get better, go farther, we've got the droplets are behaving better. They're taking longer to evaporate. They're keeping their speed longer. And then you can see on this one here, we don't have the 500 or the 800 micron droplets, which would keep this trend coming. But we really want to make sure we're getting rid of as many of these small micron size droplets, because they're giving you no benefit and may actually be harming you. Next slide. So I'm going to stop here and go, plants don't drink rocks. Plants don't drink rocks. And we'll go to the next slide. And so what we have here is a leaf surface, and you can see dry spray deposit on there. So after we spray, we're going to have some of those small droplets actually dry up before they hit the leaf surface. They're of absolutely no good use for you. We have things where they will dry up on the leaf surface, and if we can get them to re-wet, we may be able to get some activity out of them. But if we can't get them to re-wet, nothing there that's a dry crystal is going to get into the plant, and so that's a waste. So we also want to keep things liquid as long as we can. Next slide. And so Johnny had a slide similar to this. I use this one because I've got another column in there. And basically, if we just have a herbicide or a fungicide or whatever, and we spray without a deposition aid, we should probably get some pretty good coverage at the top of the plant. But you can see we're getting very poor coverage in the middle and in the bottom of the plant. And then if we use a deposition aid or drift reduction adjuvant, we see very good coverage at the top of the plant. And then we've got much better coverage at the middle and at the bottom of the plant. So what we're doing is we're cutting down on the small fine sized particles. We're getting product farther down in the canopy. We're getting better deposition there. And we should end up with better control as a result of that. Next slide. And so this is a picture of some soybeans. They were treated with fluorescent dye, and then we put a blue light over them, and you can see the fluorescence. And so if we've got that dye without a DRA adjuvant, we get very good coverage at the top of the plant and very poor coverage down lower on the plant. And then if we do the same thing, but we use a deposition and a drift reduction adjuvant, we've got very good coverage at the top of the plant and very good coverage down below, farther down in the canopy. So that's what the DRAs are doing for you. Next slide. And then thank goodness for Winfield United that they were able to do this. They, in their answer plot program, compared hundreds of times a fungicide on corn versus that same fungicide with a deposition or drift reduction adjuvant. And so we're looking at what influences there of that drift reduction adjuvant. And you can see there that the corn actually yielded 5.7 bushels more when a drift reduction adjuvant or deposition aid was used, as opposed to when it was just the fungicide alone. So we're getting, we assume the better yield is from better control of the diseases. We know we're getting a better return on investment, as you can see. And next slide. So that was on corn. This is a smaller study, but again, same thing. And this is on wheat. And so I'm going to start with and this is wheat yield. I'm going to start with the right-hand side, that bar. That is the wheat yield when the wheat was not treated with a fungicide. And then if we go to the middle bar, we see a yield increase, and that is the yield that we would get if we treated the wheat with a fungicide. And it is significant. We did get a yield increase. And then if we look at the bar that's on the left-hand side, that is the yield of the wheat when it was treated with that same fungicide with a deposition and drift reduction adjuvant. So here again, we're getting more product where we want it to be. We're getting better control, and we're getting a better return on investment. Okay, next slide. And then this one very quickly, we've got the first two sets of wheat leaves are fungicides alone, and the one on the right-hand side is the fungicide on the left, was applied with a deposition and drift reduction adjuvant, and you can see much better coverage there. Next slide. And then this is a nice demonstration. I really like this. So what we did, the bottle that's on the left-hand side is the amount of FlexStar GT that a grower would need to apply to treat his field. And what we've got there is 3.5 pints per acre. And that, at the time we did this, was a very expensive treatment. It was more than $20 per acre. It was more like in the range of $25 per acre for this particular product. And then what we did was we took that FlexStar GT, mixed it up, and we sprayed it in the wind tunnel. And what we have in the middle vial, that amount of liquid, is the spray volume of that FlexStar GT that would have been in the size of driftable fines. And we're just going to assume that all of that was lost. Now, that may or may not be true, but we know most of it will be lost, and we're just going to assume all of it's lost. And then we took that treatment with the FlexStar GT spray mix, and we added in a deposition and drift reduction adjuvant. And the little black amount of liquid at the bottom of that vial is the amount of that spray volume that would have been in driftable fines. And we're going to assume all of that was lost as well. And so what we've got is that area between the two green bars. That is the amount of FlexStar GT that actually wasn't lost. Most all of it should land where we want it to be and give us better control and a better return on investment. And if you look at that amount, it's in the range of about 10% of what we would have applied. And so we should get better control. We should get a better return on investment. Next slide. Okay, we're going back to fungicides here. We're looking at actually 4 different fungicides, A, B, C, and D. And we're using a standard XR nozzle. And what we see, this again is the spray volume that's in driftable fines. We go from 18% to 12%, or actually about a third of that spray volume is not producing driftable fines, where with the fungicide alone we are. And then if we look at the other 3 fungicides, we're basically getting in that same range. We're reducing the amount of spray volume that produces driftable fines by about a third. And so we should get better return on investment, better control. Next slide. And so the first 2 bars are kind of a repeat of what you just saw. And so with an XR nozzle, we get that same magnitude. We're actually having a third less spray volume. producing driftable fines than we did with the fungicide alone. If we look at the next bar, we've got AIXR nozzles or TT nozzles. And if we look at them, actually the amount of driftable or spray volume that's in driftable fines is significantly less when we use a drift reduction and deposition aid than with just the fungicide alone. But you can see the magnitude of the reduction is less because we're starting with nozzles that have less, they're going to drift less than the XR nozzles we got on the left-hand side. Next slide. And so we've seen not all liquids behave like water. We see that we need nozzles. And basically what we see and are recommending is that no matter what your spray mix is, no matter what your nozzles are, we think a deposition and drift reduction adjuvant can actually improve the deposition where you want it to be, get rid of a bunch of the spray volume that's going to create driftable fines, give you better control, give you a better return on investment. So basically, we think pretty much everywhere these deposition and drift reduction adjuvants should go out on every acre. And then I would say this, Johnny was talking about how few percent of the acres these products are being used on. That is still true, but we've had a big movement in this. And so these deposition and drift reduction adjuvants are being used on at least 100 million acres in the United States every year. I thank everybody for doing that and encourage you to continue or change and do this. So with that, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Johnny and Greg, for a great presentation on DRAs today. We have no questions in the chat panel at this time, but if you would like to post those, please do so now. I will go through and go ahead and put up the CEU credit slide for those of you wanting to get a CEU credit for CCAs today. Let me run down to Q&A and make sure that I didn't miss anything. Oh, we do have a couple in the Q&A. So I always have two chat functions available, and it's interesting to see who chooses to put it in Q&A or chat. So I'll start with the first one. The percentage for DRA to reduce buffer zones seems high, 2.5% of total solution.
So that is correct, and I'll let Johnny answer as well. I think it's off by a factor of 10. And so I will have to see what comes out on the final labels, but we do think that also is a typo.
Yeah, that is an error, and that will be addressed a bit later. It's way beyond what would be needed.
Next question. Tell us more about the CPDA Adjuvant Certification Program and why this is an important tool to recommend which drift reduction adjuvant works best.
The biggest limitation that we have in our adjuvant industry, with the exception of 2 states, they're really somewhat unregulated, and there's a lot of confusion about label claims, functional ingredients, and the exact functions. What the CPDA certification program does is it fills that void, and it's really more of a label standardization program in that we want the user to be able to see what are the functional ingredients, what are the functions that it provides. That may seem obvious, but we are operating in an area where there's really no rules about what is claimed or isn't claimed. And it's sort of it's a industry attempt to provide some rules that we can follow so that the states do not fill that vacuum.
Next question. It seems like the webinar is combining the concept of DRA with deposition aid. Aren't these two different, don't these two have different characteristics?
Well, as we discussed previously, if that deposition agent is able to reduce the formation of driftable fines that are occurring below 105 microns, then it too can be called a drift reduction agent. So I guess the rule we go by there is that not all deposition agents are drift reduction aids, but they are if they do reduce driftable fines below that number.
Yeah. And historically, we didn't spend a lot of time visiting about deposition aids, but we also really didn't get a very big amount of the acreage um, treated because it was less important and stuff like that. Now it's become more important. But actually, when we started talking about the deposition aid and actually getting your herbicide or your fungicide to work better, the use of these products went up substantially. And so I think a lot of the use today actually is on the deposition side, although the drift reduction is important. I think in a lot of situations, first off, you get both, but in many cases, that deposition side is actually more important.
And
Right, and it's a reminder that our ultimate goal here is not the perfect droplet; it's dead weeds and bugs. And you know, we're reaching a point where the deposition aids, which are really used for enhancement of activity, are throwing in the drift reduction as almost a side feature. And it's always been that way to some extent. I think it's even more so today.
Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did do a webinar on deposition aids back in March of 2023. So back in season 1 of the Adjuvant Advantage for the Sales Agronomist series. So if you want to go back and watch the webinar, we have that on our website as well. Next question, with a 5 bushel increase on corn and 3.7 bushel on wheat, when fungicides are applied with a drift reduction adjuvant, how can the industry raise awareness to make growers more aware?
That's a great question. Hopefully that we'll get people to try this and stuff like that. It a lot of times people will have to demonstrate this for themselves, but it is real. And one of the things, so I've walked thousands and thousands of plots. With a If you can get enough disease into a crop, you can see it. You can go in and actually see. I've got good disease control on the top of the plant, but not down low. If I just use a fungicide alone, with a fungicide with a deposition or drift reduction adjuvant, I can see I've got good healthy green tissue all the way down, and then you do have to go get the yields as well. People will have to demonstrate it to themselves, but that's something that a retailer may in fact be able to have, is set out some demo plots and things like that so people can see it.
Next question, will the use of drift reduction adjuvants be impacted as more pesticides go through the ESA process?
Yes, we certainly, and that's why we've been working at CPDA so aggressively with the agency on this, because we really need help in this area. The buffer zones that are being talked about have the potential to remove a lot of arable land. And so the DRAs are going to be one of multiple tools that the applicator and growers will have to keep those buffer zones small.
Yeah. And I'll kind of throw this little piece in there too. So way back when, before the dicamba days, EPA was looking at trying to mandatorily reduce spray drift, and they really wanted to copy the Europeans, which do everything with pretty much just the nozzles. And we didn't want to go that way because we knew that we would have coverage problems and we would get more herbicide resistance if in fact we had to use everything with big droplets and do a crappier job. And so we were able to try and get EPA not to go that way. And so we've done all this testing and things in the wind tunnels So one of our goals is to minimize spray drift, maximize deposition, but also maximize coverage. And so with the nozzle and the DRA, we can do a better job of that than we can with just the nozzle alone.
What are the disadvantages of air induction nozzles? They showed in your data a huge reduction in driftable fines.
So it's a mixed bag. If you have nozzles compared to nozzles, the drift induction nozzles can be helpful. We have to be a little bit careful because some DRAs will work well with them, other DRAs will not work well with them. So it's in that fine tuning. You can make them work very well, and you can have problems at the same time with it if you choose a different DRA.
Will adjuvant rates change using drones to apply pesticides? And do we use aerial application as the guide for adjuvant rates?
So go ahead.
Yeah, that's sort of a work in progress. And one of the things that we're learning, there's an assumption that the drone applications will follow the guidelines of what we're doing with aerial, and they're actually quite different. So as we learn more about this new mode of application here, I think it's going to be unique. I mean, I can argue it both ways that it could very well reduce the amount that we're needing. You could even conceivably design a carrier just for some of these drone applications and not even fool with the water anymore. So it's a work in progress, but I think the big thing we're learning is that it doesn't naturally, or you assume it would, that what we've learned in aerial applications would go over to the drones, and it really doesn't. It's a whole different approach.
Yeah, I agree. It's something we're going to have to between the whole industry, universities and practitioners, we're going to have to figure it out. But I mean, we need to do it based on science um, and testing. So, because actually on the preliminary stuff we've seen, it's working better than we thought, but there's a lot of room for improvement as well.
Imagine the challenges we're going to have. You know, we all deal with compatibility issues. Now we're going to a system that really has no agitation. And
Yeah.
so it's really going to present a new set of challenges to formulators to build formulations and adjuvants that do not rely or aren't dependent on agitation. That's one big change we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah.
Lastly, can you comment about the difference between oil emulsions and polymer-based products to control drift? Which would be the most suitable for different application nozzles?
I can't give you an exact answer because we have the nozzle is an important component there, and we have the DRA. Now, if what you're spraying really wants a lot of coverage, then I would probably lean towards the oil adjuvant and away from the DRA. I mean the thickener. Um, but it depends on the nozzle and what you need it to do. If you just need it to make big droplets and things like that, and coverage isn't quite as important, then you can get there with both ways. And in fact, the thickeners may do a better job in certain situations where coverage isn't as important. If you need the coverage, then you're probably using a completely different nozzle, and you're going to eliminate fines without creating big droplets, and so that may get you more in the area you want. And I know I really didn't give you an answer, but it comes back to the it depends, and I welcome any comments Johnny might have.
Yeah, typically, and again, I'm using generalizations. I mean, you'll find when the goal is enhancing efficacy, it tends to tilt more to the oil-based systems. You know, I'm not just trying to necessarily reduce the formation of driftable fines, but I'm actually trying to use oil to or try to get more through the canopy and try then to enhance absorption of the active ingredient. As a general rule, that tends to go toward the oil-based deposition sprays. But again, it's a general rule. There are exceptions to that. There are people that have done a good job building polymers around other components that enhance activity. So I think it's another good sign of just how vibrant the adjuvant industry is in the U.S. that we're able to custom tailor and design these things. We may get to the point where we're back to enhancing efficacy, and drift reduction is something we throw in for free. You know, that's probably where we're evolving.
Well, lots of great questions today. We want to thank Johnny and Greg again for their time. I want to remind everyone the next webinar coming up January 7th, sponsored by Drexel and Helena, adjuvants and herbicides and how to optimize performance while minimizing crop response. It's been a great partnership with CPDA. I want to again thank Growmark for their sponsorship of today's webinar. I will leave the QR code up for just a few minutes as folks that haven't gotten a chance to log their CEUs can do that. But again, you can find all of these webinars on the ARA dashboard website at aradc.org. Please feel free to reach out to me, hunter@aradc.org, if you have any questions, or info@aradc.org if you need help getting your login. Thank you again, Johnny, Greg, Terry, and the team at CPDA for all their work on this, and we will see you in January. We hope everyone has a safe and happy holiday season.
Thank you.
So long. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.